Okay, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're here at the UNFCCC Pavilion on the side of COP30, and today you're joining me on a panel called Connecting the Dots from Ground Action to Global Commitments Through High Integrity Climate and Nature Implementation. So my name is Ramarda Ninad Earth from the Luang Foundation, and I'm very honored to be moderating for this very esteemed panelists made up of government representatives as well as the International Panel on Biodiversity Credit and also representatives from real project developers on the ground. Okay, so today we're trying to see, because this COP is the first time we're actually really talking about forest and nature at the same time as climate. So we're trying to see how do we actually connect the dots amongst the two very key agenda, which is climate and nature. So maybe to begin, if the esteemed panelists can just very quickly, less than half a minute, introduce yourselves and your organization. Yes, Camille.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Camille Maclay. I work as Deputy Director and Government Relations Director of the International Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credits.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Calvin Chong. I'm the Divisional Director looking after energy and climate policy at the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment in Singapore. So my portfolios cover climate mitigation as well as climate adaptation. So happy to learn from the panelists on what we can do on the carbon markets front as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Pavit Kesavabong. I'm the Deputy Director General of the Department of Climate Change and Environment, and we are the policy maker of the climate change under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, who take care of the biodiversity as well. Nice to meet you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandeep, and I represent a company called VNV. We're a project developer. We work in about 16 countries in Asia and Africa. Big focus on nature-based and community-based projects. We're a social enterprise, which is a combination of more than 100 NGOs that we represent in the carbon markets. Really happy to be here, and thank you for having me here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Duke. I'm the Secretary General of the Luang Foundation from Thailand. I, too, run a social enterprise, and we focus on community livelihood, nature-based solutions, and we're looking at how we can enhance livelihood of the people in the community, as well as protecting and reviving the nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. So maybe to help us understand the context on the ground a little bit. So Kunduk, if you can just share from your experiences on decades working in the field, how do you actually see the nature and climate agenda intersecting on the ground?
Okay, first off, I think when we look at nature and climate agenda, we cannot talk about it from the...
There you go.
They spoke, exactly. We cannot talk about it from the technical perspective alone, but I think we need to look at what allows climate and nature to maintain itself, restore itself, and that's, I think, ultimately, it's the people. And when we look at this in events like this, usually, often there are people who are policymakers and private sectors, civil societies who are represented here, but the frontline communities, people who are playing the role of protecting and reviving our climate and our nature, are not really included. So I think the intersection of all of this is how can policy be implemented in a way that includes the people in this community, allowing them to be part of the solution, and at the same time, I think, equip them with necessary technical know-how, and in order to allow them to do the work on our behalf. I think that's a really important intersection.
Great, thank you very much, Kunduk. So now if we are able to broaden it to the larger field in larger country context, because we understand you're working across over 15 countries in different continents. So maybe if Sandeep, if you can share across your projects how you see this intersection between climate and nature.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in my opinion, it's like a Venn diagram. It's not an intersection. I mean, it's within this, right? I mean, what is the difference between nature and climate? It's a very difficult question to answer because I think they're intrinsically the same. Why? Because like Duke mentioned, I think climate action is not just about climate action. It's about people action. It is about fauna action as well, wildlife. What's their fault in all of this? You know, suddenly we have massive amount of wildlife movements who don't have a clue what's going on, right? We at least know what's going on and trying to adapt. Now, who adapts for them? So this is intrinsically related as well. In a lot of the work that we do and you do, when we work with nature, we will have to also work with the dwellers within nature, and that's people, wildlife, everybody that we're talking about. On the intersection, I think, comes in. Good to see you, Perma. I think the intersection comes in on the financing side, and that's where I think we need to spend some time on why are we financing climate differently and nature differently. I think we have to look at these two because they're connected in some way or the other. One, your funding is working for another thing, and from a global context. And I have used this and maybe overused this in a lot of panels. Carbon tunnel vision. Let's not get there again and again. It's not just about carbon. It is about a lot of other things. We need to worry about water. We need to worry about vegetation. We need to worry about the quality of our vegetation. We measure forest by canopy cover. I say that's a wrong measurement. It is about the quality of the forest that you should be measuring. So there are different kinds of monitoring mechanisms that we have to deploy to actually get that proper intersection on financing of nature, because just financing climate isn't going to be enough for the planet. So that's, probably talk about it a little bit more later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before we go on to the next question, we're also joined by our representative from the UNFCCC on the panel. Yes, so to pick up from that conversation, Sandeep, you mentioned that sometimes they come together through financing, which needs to address so many multiple aspects. So if we can move on to Camille and to share a little bit, because I understand that your International Panel on Biodiversity Credits has come up with a framework to actually incorporate evaluation of biodiversity and nature. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you very much. The IAPB was created in 2023 to encourage and support the development of high-integrity biodiversity credit market. In that mission, the objective is not to repackage existing carbon credit markets. The mission is to recognize and reward the protection of the value of nature and the value of ecosystem services associated with nature. In our work, the IAPB worked on a framework which we call a high-integrity framework, which was published in Cali at COP16 last year, which explains the parameters of high-integrity markets. These are additional and measurable outcome for nature, equity and fairness for people, including local communities and indigenous people, and governance of markets and transparency. If you would like to consult this framework, it is online, but I can also share a copy here. The boundaries with carbon markets are a very major component of our work. We do not want to replicate carbon markets because carbon and biodiversity are vastly different. Biodiversity is not fungible. You do not replace the loss of tropical forest by restoration of a wetland elsewhere. Biodiversity is not measured in the same way from one place to another. Biodiversity impacts are not compensated for or offsetted in the same fashions. Lastly, the registers and the tradability of credits should follow different guiding principles to ensure and maintain the right level of transparency and equitable benefit sharing from credit markets.
Great. So in a lot of ways, there are similar fundamentals on governance and involving people on the integrity aspect, but then they also have to take into consideration the specific nature and people context differently. Okay, so now if we were to move on to the country, the government level, if you can kindly share with us from the Thai perspective, I understand that Thailand has just launched the revised NDC 3.0, and also we have also released the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan to help guide the biodiversity space and policy development in Thailand. Might you be able to kindly share with us how those two are coming together, the NDC goals as well as the NBSAP?
So thank you very much for the question. It's very important because everyone just mentioned on the climate change and biodiversity, we are not able to breaking out. We have to move in together. So the policy in Thailand, we starting from the 20-year strategies and just apply to the climate change long-term strategies. Like mentioned, the NBSAP as well. So we think that the first move, like under the Ministry of National Resources, and for Thailand, we just submit the NDC 3.0 that focusing not only for the mitigation side, but also we just put land use and land use change, including the forestry, in the NDC 3.0. It means that we have to take focusing on the forestry. So we have the risk of the biodiversity as well. So like Kun Duk just mentioned, the Luang, who take care of the local community forest. So it means we can apply to the carbon credit for the community. But for the biodiversity national action plan, so we now the Office of the Policy and Planning, they just formulate the draft of the Biodiversity Act. So it means that we have to put like on the conservation side as well as for the financing side to help the people can generate the income from the conserve the biodiversity. Not only for the government side, but we encourage the private sectors. We encourage the financial institution to engage for both the climate change as well as the biodiversity. So because without the financial mechanism, we are not able to moving forward our national policy.
Great, thank you very much. That's very hopeful that we have a clear roadmap on both ends. And if we're to ask Singapore, as you know, a country that has always been very active on sustainability, and we understand that you have very clear roadmaps, might you be able to share with us a little bit on how Singapore is navigating this connection between climate and nature?
Thanks very much for the question. I think one way to think about this in the broader context is that we call Singapore a city in nature, right? We are an island. We are urban to a large extent, but we are in Southeast Asia and we're surrounded by nature. So it's something that we always appreciate and not take for granted. So that's the first point. And so when we think about engaging in carbon markets and engaging in nature, it really starts with a few frameworks. So it really starts with Article 6 as well as the Paris Agreement. And we want to take cue from that development then to go into the second stage, which is how do we then sign implementation agreements with like-minded countries who want to develop high quality, high environmental integrity carbon credits that is aligned with Article 6 as well as the Paris Agreement. So that's the second level. Then at the third level, we have the meta standards as well as the carbon credit programs. And in many carbon credit programs, be it Vera or Gold Standard, there are very specific biodiversity metrics that need to be adhered to, that needs to be audited, that countries need to put in into place robust MRV regimes in order to account for the corresponding adjustments. So what I'm describing are the different layers of the architectures and the structures and the frameworks that help different players, be it project developers, be it countries, be it activists, be it local communities who want to engage in carbon markets, to then navigate to make sure that we uphold high environmental integrity, but at the same time can engage in carbon markets in a meaningful way. So I think Singapore and Thailand, in no small part, when we signed the international implementation agreement, there was an implicit understanding that we want to have nature-based credits as part of our whitelisted methodologies. It's not, of course, the only set of methodologies that we may have, but that's very important, I think, to both our countries. And it's a clear demand signal then to project developers and to other countries how they can consider nature-based credits. And we take cue from meta centers like IAPB as well as other organizations on what are the international best practices, what are the ways to think about biodiversity that then can percolate through the rest of the ecosystem. So hopefully that helps everyone.
Certainly, that's wonderful to see the national, the regional, and the international connection. And you touched on the Paris Agreement and Article 6.0. So I think it would be prime time to then move on to our representative from the UNFCCC to touch on a little bit about that, on how these enabling infrastructure is helping us move on the two agenda together. And perhaps you could also share about the recent financing gaps we're facing at the moment and how that may be able to accommodate addressing two agenda at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the invitation, and I'm sorry for coming late. During the sessions, coming from some bilateral meetings to come over here is always challenging. Pleasure to be here. I think when it seems as like Article 6, I think Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the foundational principle basically it has 4 principles, and oftentimes people like many of our colleagues, when they speak, they directly talk about bilateral cooperation. We talk about international carbon markets, etc. But the foundational principle there, where it plays very closely to the nature, is it has 4 components. So one is about the sustainable development. The second one is poverty eradication. Then how to assist these corporations, the voluntary corporations actually assist in terms of increasing the ambition. And the fourth one is about how you can make your NDCs more economically implementable, right? And from the Article 6 framework, we are seeing quite a number of early movers. We heard from Singapore in terms of their activities related to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, to helping in terms of, I think they have recently added the HFLD activities as part of their positive list, which is to send a clear signal. But coming from, I think like when our colleague talked about the clear difference between biodiversity credit and a carbon credit, I would say that these are basically like, from a nature perspective, it could be 2 sides of one coin. If you actually work very closely, there are unique differences, but they can be stacked with each other in order to maximize the impact in terms of revenues, etc. Is the foundational principles different? Could be, because I'm not a biodiversity credit expert. I'm a GHG carbon market expert, so I could see from that side. And I always used to say that if we wanted to really have high-scale action, multiplicity, either just having an infrastructure enables everything to happen, because I'm hardly hearing from that because I could only hear the word infrastructure, is just having an high sophisticated infrastructure can solve all the problems in terms of scaling up of the action that we have to do, and particularly through carbon markets. Spending 2 decades in this market, I would say no, because infrastructure looks at your downstream part of your action from a carbon market value chain, but it doesn't really look at the source. So any garbage thrown in can continue to be monitored as a garbage until the end. So if your question is, again, apologies that if your question is that is the infrastructure helping moving scaling of climate action, for sure it contributes, but the main impediment to that is that what goes into as an input to the infrastructure is much more important from a carbon market perspective. The 4 foundational principles, I would say, are supplementarity. I think we heard about some concept about how do you demonstrate that something you have done is beyond what you would have done in a business as usual scenario, right? It has to be additional. That's what we call it a supplementarity. The second one is about the integrity, what we are talking about. There were some references being made by our colleague from Singapore in terms of what kind of standards they are looking at. But we have been promoting, because UNFCCC also has its own centralized crediting mechanism, which has its own standards in terms of looking at how the credit integrity has to be established, particularly on nature. I could see Sandeep and his smile, because he's a very active private sector participant to provide inputs to that process. So that's where the integrity comes in, right? Like if you want to scale up your market, if you want to unlock finance, you have to make sure that the integrity is being taken care of. And then it is very clear, I fully agree with our colleague, which said that like the way that you look at fungibility between a carbon credit market and a biodiversity credits are different. But for a carbon market credit, if it has to be used by Singapore, or Singapore is facilitating a transaction for another country to buy those credits to offset an emission elsewhere, it has to have the rigor of fungibility. And if that fungibility is not there, I know that we can have, the science will tell us that we need to do more actions to happen, but we also have to look at the long-term benefits of this short-term action, what it is creating to the atmosphere. And the last one is transparency, and that's where it exactly sits with the question on infrastructure. So you cannot jump into the transparency element of the things having a sophisticated infrastructure, unlocking finance, if you have really not addressed the other three issues that I talk about. So that's why I always say that when you talk to financiers and financial markets, they say that like in order for us to have any secured financial transactions, we look at a SWIFT code, right? Like that's a secured way to transfer money from one place to the other. You need a SWIFT code. The similar way, if you want in a carbon market, if you want to have a secure market to scale, you also need a SWIFT. The only difference is it is supplementarity, integrity, fungibility, and transparency. So if you cannot do that, the scale does not happen, the action does not happen. And what UNFCCC is doing is to try to enable through the intergovernmental process to provide the policy direction for people to take the right choices. And here we are not an implementing agency, but what we are trying to make sure is that our standards set the right tone for people to work on and to improve further.
Great, thank you very much. So we have that policy aspect as well, and touching on the infrastructure or the enabling ecosystem. So if we maybe we'll come back to Calvin to actually touch on that, as you know, the country who is very involved in trading carbon credits. And there was also touching on the private sector. So I understand that you don't see this as just, you know, in the goodness of protecting nature, but actually you see the economic aspect and how nature is fundamental to Singapore's economy as well.
I think there are many ways to think about this, right? Because climate action doesn't mean just engaging in the carbon markets. There are many ways that you can improve biodiversity, to make contributions to climate action or to nature that has absolutely nothing to do with carbon credits. So let me just put it out there that, don't get me wrong, what I just described is just Singapore's way of engaging in carbon markets. But by no means is it meant to displace or to say that this should take priority over another kind of climate action. So that's really my first point. And so the second point is we're very sensitive, of course, that if we engage in carbon markets, there are very good principles out there that we need to adhere to, right? Many of what is just been described, you know, additionality, transparency, environmental integrity. Many carbon credit programs have also said leakage, permanence. These are all valid. And as far as possible, we want to make sure that these standards are internationally recognized, that again, there are robust MRV frameworks that can verify that things have happened where they said they're supposed to happen. And as rightly pointed out by the UNFCCC, we do need, perhaps in the future, to think a bit harder about what kind of, we call it infrastructure, but it essentially is just part of to me, it's part of a larger MRV mechanism, be it domestic or international, to really make sure that we secure that the integrity of the process. And so linking back to your point on nature, I feel that sometimes let's not miss the forest for the trees, right? Again, there are many ways that which we can engage in climate action and in nature. Singapore is very serious about exploring nature-based solutions, both in climate mitigation and in adaptation. And then specifically in carbon markets, we are of course particularly interested in nature-based credits. In our first call for proposals, it is deliberately only focused on nature-based solutions. We have 4 projects at the moment. I believe 3 of which are REDD plus projects. And so I think that is baby steps, right? Is to point a way forward that this is possible. And we're happy to move as far as everyone else is comfortable and able to move on these issues.
Great. Probably not baby steps, but pioneering steps to help set the tone. So, I mean, if we could then move on to that on Thailand's end, we know that Thailand and Singapore have been very active in working together to grow a high integrity carbon market for ASEAN. So, if you could share a little bit about the direction of that.
So yesterday we have the event launching the cooperation under the Article 6 between Thailand and Singapore. We already have the implemented agreement. So, and we are for the next step we will come up with the action plan, and we are having said that the biodiversity based or nature based is very important. Because you know that Thailand we have plenty of supply, and yesterday on the slide of the Singapore that showed us the all over the world has the areas of the forestry. So it means that Thailand we are ready for having the the Article 6 with Singapore, and I think that with the Luang Foundation, so we can move. A little bit faster, and of course we have the forest in the uphill, and also we have the coastal areas like mangrove area as well. So it means that we have a lot of the project that we can have with Singapore. I said that because in Thailand we have the guideline for the carbon trade transfer, and the nature-based project is one of the key area that we have to focus on. So it means that biodiversity and climate change will connected in seamless practice. So for the financial mechanism, I think that the climate finance is very beyond our expectation. And the biofin is very challenging to Thailand as well. But how can we ease the financial mechanism to address the biodiversity loss as well as to mitigate the greenhouse gas emission by the nature-based solution? Like Kevin just mentioned, the biodiversity, not only the mitigation side, but in Thailand we put the biodiversity in the adaptation action plan as well. So I think for the carbon credit mechanism, not only for the bilateral Singapore and Thailand, but we introduced like the high integrity ASEAN carbon credit initiative as well. So it means that we can avoid the fragmentation on the carbon market in ASEAN. So we can share expertise, experience from Singapore and Thailand. We have the premium tier to introduce that the CORSIA just approved.
Great. Thank you very much. So hopefully that makes you hopeful, Sandeep, that there is, going to be some sort of coming together in ASEAN to help you with your project development in the region. So if we can take this to the ground a little bit, and if you can share, because we've discussed a lot about having high integrity projects and also benefits for the people and proper MRV processes in place. So from your experience in project development, can you share a little bit on, I understand you're working in carbon credit projects, but how do you actually integrate the biodiversity MRV in the process, and how does it actually impact the community and also help to grow a high integrity market?
Yeah, I think, having done this now for a little while, we've also failed in a lot of our projects. It's not always been a good story, and I think that's something that we have to take some learnings from. And I'll give you some examples. We went for an agroforestry program in 2014 with smallholders who were very keen to work with us, but we kind of did not look at the growth of the trees basis the amount of water that is available and is left in that landscape, because that didn't cross our minds at all. We were looking at species, native species, which has grown there for years now, but have stopped growing. Climate change also impacts what has been happening will not happen again, right? So that is a learning. So this is what's got us thinking that we have to look at all kinds of aspects for a carbon project to work, and not just the primary thing that what we are trying to do. You guys work in mangroves, in a similar kind of a concept. For example, we have a project in Madagascar where we first had to work with energy access before planting even one tree, because there were no lights. If there are no lights, I don't have Wi-Fi. How do I do DMRV? I can't fly drones. I can't do anything, right? So everything's connected. So that's why I am completely in this whole thing of it's an ecosystem. Look at the ecosystem. And for me, I think pocketed interventions in nature-based will not work. We have to go landscape. The coast is connected to agricultural landscapes, and in the middle you have a lot more. And in the sea, you have a whole new landscape. Seascape, we'll call it what you will. I think that integrated approach is where our learnings are from. And another thing that I would want to mention is not every project will have a carbon credit. And it does not make it less important. I have a project in West Papua on reef restoration. We restore 1 hectare of reef per year. 1 hectare there is more keystone species than 10,000 hectares of terrestrial forest in a landscape. I'm not saying one is greater to the other, but I'll never get a carbon credit for that. But should we not work on that? Right? So that is where I really appreciate your comment, saying that climate action is not just about carbon action. We have to do a lot more. We have a Red Panda project, which is a corridor between Tibet and Nepal, where we are restoring a landscape so that there could be more red panda movements around that. Now, I cannot get a carbon credit for it, but it's important. So I really think there is a space for biodiversity credits, but it will be more outcome-based funding. If I look at it from a voluntary perspective, I don't think this is a fungible, tradable credit. I don't think I will promote it that way anyway. I do think it's an outcome-based. Like you have a unit, you funded something, you get a unit. And that is important to understand that I don't think when we talk biodiversity markets, I don't think we are talking carbon markets and biodiversity. It's not the same thing. And I don't think it ever should be the same thing. So again, going back to my point, I think internationally we'll have to think about how does nature come into climate action and not have the carbon tunnel thing going on. Biodiversity, water, wildlife, everything comes together. And while I have Perumal here, I really hope with the Article 6, we can get nature into Article 6 in a way that is implementable, which in a way that allows carbon markets to thrive, because without compliance markets, I do see a problem in nature-based crediting. What Singapore and Thailand is doing is a typical compliance market scenario. Yes, you may use a voluntary mechanism, but it is compliance, which is why now you will have finance flowing. And I do hope that the world realizes that we need compliance markets for nature.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandeep. And that's getting your priorities right, addressing the actual context you're facing, right? And I know Kunduk there is itching to say something because he's been reacting to all your comments. So maybe if we can continue in that direction, and maybe you can share a little bit about, because we've been talking about regulations, about MRV, the actual people on the ground who this is intended to benefit, where do they feature in all of this?
Okay, well, again, I'm gonna take a few moments just to kind of like wrap it all around. First, I think what we need to do is we need to look at the bigger picture than this. Our very lives are actually depending on the existence of nature. I think that is a fact. Climate change does not only, we cannot just count emissions. What we need to do is we need to see how it affects the ecosystems that allow for all of us to live in. Right? We have loss of insects, animals, fishes in the seas, and so on. And this will eventually affect us. But we just won't live to see the impact. It's the people who comes after us that will live to see the impact. For me, I said it in the previous session that what we do today, the generations that are yet to be born will live with it. That's is really, really sad because they would have no way of directing how things have to go. So I think it's our responsibility to try to do that. Yes, carbon credit is one of the ways for us to be able to measure it, to put a price on it, but it's not the only way. Let's say if we are to grow a species of tree that can absorb so much carbon and in the end ended up destroying the biodiversity, we won't be able to live. That's also a fact. And as I said earlier, that we sit here in this room making policies, but we're not the ones implementing or doing the protection. It's actually the people in the community, on the ground, living in the forest, doing agriculture. At the end, the policy needs to connect all the way down to the grassroots level where people can implement. And we need to see results, and we need to gain the yardage from there. We need to do it that way, and I think that is the only way. So the question for us here is, we need to design a policy that can be trickled down in a way that can scale, in a way that is affordable, and in a way that makes business sense. And that's a really, really big challenge, right? So if one of the, I think, nice solution that we can do right away is maybe take off some of our subsidy on energy sector and redeploy it over there, or focusing not only on reforestation, not only on carbon credits, but more on biodiversity protection, because science shows that it costs less and it has more impact. But that doesn't really fit very well in conferences like this just yet. But if we have channel where we can put nature more into the mix, I think we would probably have more innovation, more solutions, and I think listening to the voices of the community is also extremely crucial, and we need to have a bit more of that. I think the COP in Beijing here is really, really good because you actually to see that element, right? So I hope that we would have progress, movement towards including nature into the mix in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. So if we're to take that reflection from the ground perspective and the people component back to actually the focus on, because that side of the panel has been trying to look into the carbon, but speak about it in a larger language that also benefits people and many other components at the same time. If we're to actually ask you, who is probably the only person directly involved in just biodiversity credit and financing, how could you share a little bit about how the biodiversity credit regulations or space is evolving, and possibly also examples of projects that you see focusing on biodiversity impact?
Yes, so as I said before, biodiversity credits, or nature credits, as we like to call them as well, are very different from carbon credits. they are conceptually based on initially the model of carbon credits, of course, but they aim to reward a different type of outcome and to monetize a different type of service. We have just completed a global landscape survey of biodiversity credit markets globally, which is now online, and I encourage you to consult that from our website. That shows that at least 19 countries have already adopted regulations that frame, enable, and regulate nature credit markets. Some of that is based on offsetting requirements, and we are seeing some of those markets evolve towards voluntary contribution markets. The IAPB also operates a community of practice with a little more than 40 projects globally in 27 countries of the world. In those communities of practice, we aim to analyze the processes and design criteria of the projects, and to share lessons and also to promote working models. And I will give you 3 examples that I think illustrate how nature outcomes can be monetized separately from climate mitigation related outcomes. However, they do contribute to climate adaptation policies, and they are not at all separated from climate change management. I'll start with France, where every summer now our national power utility faces the need to close down nuclear power plants with 2,000 megawatts installed capacity for several days in a row due to heat waves and the lack of sufficiently cool water to cool nuclear reactors. This is a dramatic problem which may cause power shortages and industry-wide disruptions at regional level. EDF is now partnering with a company called La Belle Forêt, the Beautiful Forest, which implements beyond FSC, beyond good practice, forest management practices to support watershed restoration alongside the rivers that EDF uses to pump water for cooling its nuclear power plants. So the aim is to secure water resilience for the nuclear power utility. In addition to that, the forests do generate carbon credits from avoided loss of sequestration, from reduction of timber offtake from the forest. But based on the payment for ecosystem service model, they can remunerate water-related outcomes for that power plant. Another example is in the marine economy. We partner with Conservation International, who operates in the Tahabuhu Marine Protected Area of the Philippines, a UNESCO World Heritage Reserve, where they use community-led marine management approaches to address both the impacts of climate change on marine environments, on coral reefs, and the impacts of unsustainable fishing practices to restore coral reefs environments and fish resources. The outcome payment, if you like, comes from revenue from ecotourism and improved fishing, sustainable fishing revenue. A third one is a company called Savimbo, which we heard of quite a lot in that COP, who operate in Colombia and Ecuador. And Savimbo's intervention are 100% indigenous people-led. They target forest conservation with monitoring of emblematic keystone species that are proxy indicators for ecosystem health. Through those indigenous-led forest conservation projects, Savimbo managed to sell voluntary carbon credits on the VCM market, and on top of that, to stack voluntary biodiversity credits to willing off-takers. And I will finish there to really emphasize that this is about stacking, additionalizing revenue from biodiversity outcomes on top of carbon sequestration related outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we actually do have examples, and we see private sector being involved here, as well as even bottom-up initiatives through the community being involved in this. So I think we only have, the last part of the panel for a very, this is a very enriching discussion, which then I would like to ask our esteemed panelists to leave us with parting words on if we were to answer, the question on this panel, connecting the dots between climate and nature, what would be, your recommendation or your involvement in the immediate key next steps that you think would be necessary to connect the dots between nature and climate? So perhaps we start on this side. Yeah.
Thank you. So very shortly, at this UNFCCC COP30, we have launched our policy forum, which will aim to foster policy and regulatory dialogue on enabling regulatory environments for nature credit markets to scale up. The UK, France, Indonesia, and various other countries have expressed strong interest to support that forum. And I would say that the interest that we see from country delegates who come here to negotiate climate change mitigation and adaptation policies, their interest in our work in nature credit markets illustrates how the nature and climate connection has now been integrated in the climate change policy discussion, and how those innovative financial solutions are being seen as part of the solution for climate change adaptation and nature recovery.
Before you depart, please.
I was trying to evade you from the parting words. No, I would say that I think we as a UNFCCC, I think we have three prominent roles, which we act as a custodian, convener, and catalyst, right? So I think what we are seeing quite a lot, probably this COP is called as I will not be going to pronounce properly, Mutiro COP, and you will be having a negotiating text that will be coming out soon, which is basically also talking about quite a lot about integration between the different Rio Convention bodies, between climate change, biodiversity, and land restoration. There are elements that, when I say as a catalyst, I think one of the catalytic force is to bring the different policy conversations that is happening at different places. Like often, you can imagine that if I think we could ask our esteemed colleague, the DDG from Thailand, you would know that when you have all these three things are being handled at three different, even within the same ministries with three different files that is being moved, one doesn't know what the other does, right? So the first and foremost, if you want to really bring it, I can say from my experience more from the top-down basis, I'm sure Sandeep and others will be talking about the bottom-up process. From a top-down process, I would say in order for these two things to come together much closer, we need a high level of policy integration and also actions. I think one of your questions is also about how local actions can benefit. So I would also normally, one of my favorite word is about vertical and then horizontal integration in terms of different actions that we take. So from a policy perspective, from a bottom-up perspective, I think it was very clear from the colleague who was sitting next to my left. It's very clear in terms of how do you make sure that the benefits that you do, one is about communication, and the benefits are actually equitably shared with the final citizen who is implementing these activities. Unless that you can keep that society connected to what you do on a policy space, the integration that I talked about can make that change in bringing both nature and climate together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Permo. So then, if we will have departing words from Calvin.
Sure, I guess we're very diligent to work down the road. I think my parting words is really about value. And I don't mean value in the commercial sense. I think policy decisions are a reflection of what society values as well. Governments, anyone who works in government will recognize that. So if your people value nature, your people value biodiversity, if your people value taking action on climate, your policies will reflect that. And it's going to be an iterative process. I would like to believe many of us are in this room firmly believe that our people do value biodiversity and nature, and therefore us working in government, it is our responsibility to then reflect that value in the policies that we do. Let me give you an example. So Singapore makes it a point that when we do carbon credit programs with countries, we set aside 5% of the proceeds to adaptation locally. And that's something that, as a buyer country, we leave it to the seller country to implement as they see fit. Be it to a local community or a specific community, we leave it to the host country. And that's our way of saying we value adaptation. We recognize that there's much more at stake than just carbon markets here, and this is our contribution. And I would like to think that if we start moving to reflect more of these values in biodiversity, in nature, in the policy moves that we make, that is going to be, again, a very strong demand signal to other players as well. So that's my call to action, so to speak, my way of saying there are ways at which we can link nature and climate in meaningful ways in policy.
Thank you for that. And Kun Pawit?
So first of all, I'd like to thank the Brazil to convene the COP30 in Belém, because we can see the community, the biodiversity interlinked with the climate change. So how important of the local community as for the climate change. We as the policy makers, we have to look around, put the policy on the ground. Therefore, climate action is very important, but the climate transition is highly important. So we think that perhaps the UN can thinking about convene the UN FCCC and the UN biodiversity at the same time. So it's been that we have to working together with the robust, solution, not only for the climate change, but also the biodiversity.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Sandeep.
Yeah, I think one of my key takeaways on nature, I do want to see, because we are at a COP, I do want to see policymakers on Article 6 make nature part of what they are thinking. I think it's very important. Why? And I've been trying to say this because it can be very detrimental what goes on over there, as rules of durability and permanence will influence what happens in other markets as well very quickly. So we have to make that very clearly. You know, there are rules there being set about 100-year permanence and all of that, which is absolute nonsense as far as I'm concerned. I'm telling you, like, we have a battle against nature that we have to win. We should be thinking 20, 30, 40, next generation. Not the most durable, not carbon credit is not going to save this world. So we have to be very careful about the balance between durability and quality and survivability. So for me, it's a clear message, and I think that needs to go to the policymakers, because what will come out of that room will be very detrimental to countries like Thailand, Indonesia, the country I come from, India. You know, so I think that's a very important message they have to look at. So yeah, I will leave it with that. I think that's my parting message. Shame that he left, actually, before I could say it.
He's actually running away from you.
Over to Kunduk, please.
Okay. We used to work in Indonesia, and when I was there, I came across a very interesting campaign. I guess it was an election campaign back then. It said, "Talk less, do more," and I think my parting words would be: we need to create impact. We need to have series of small wins. We need to really show the world that, you know, what we do matters, and we need to collect these small wins and learn from them and create a larger movement in, I guess, you know, connecting the dots, bridging between carbon credits and nature. And I really like your point, you know, Calvin, that I think we need to lead with the heart. I think sometimes we think too much about country statement, political position, but at the end of the day, we all live in the same world. And this is the problem that we're facing together. Unless we have this kind of, like, you know, heart-to-heart connection between countries, we will not have like a cohesive policies and, you know, series of small wins where we can transform things in time.
Thank you very much. So I really hope that our discussions lead to policies that really reflect our values and the values that we would like to pass on to the next generation, and that we can continue working together across sectors to advance these important agenda. So with that, I thank you very much, our esteemed panelists.